Welcome to Eating While Honey and Locusts. Thank you for joining us on this presentation today. I am Jessica Anaq. We're based in the United Kingdom, Rugby, Warwickshire, actually. And, for the last couple of years, we've been transmitting each Tuesday, doing these programs, bringing different subjects, topics to you, all that you request, heavy on our heart. And even today's one is a continuation of that. Just before I go any further, such a lovely time to always see everyone joining in as they come through. Sherry Pappin, so great to see you here. Thank you. David Morgan, Perry Burrock, Maria Doyle, Lance Walden, Chris Pierce, welcome. Thank you so much for joining week by week, and to others that will join in as the feed becomes live, and to those who are joining in who subscribe to Gary Wayne's channel and just follow him as he tours the different channels in person and online. So you're very, very welcome. So, as I was saying, we're based in the United Kingdom. We're actually in three borders. We are in Warwickshire, we are in Northamptonshire and Leicestershire. The blueprint of EWHAL has two specific parts to it. There are many, many other facets, but two that are very notable when you think of EWHAL is the fact that we host the feast nationwide and also internationally. And, that's what's happened this year now. For the fourth year consecutively, we are hosting Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles, Atonement in the UK, abroad. Actually, this year, let me just get that straight. We are returning from the second year running to Davenport, Orlando, Florida. We've got a few places left there, so periodically I will put the information up on the screen. The few places that are left, contact me. After that, we're closed and it's day attendance only. And you're very, very welcome up until the second, actually you can continue to contact me. And as long as I'm contactable, we can look at that. But, we've got that. We have the feast that we do. And when we brought them into the UK, starting almost 4 years ago now, one of the vicinities that we brought it to was very, very noticeable for us being a strong community in number, let alone faith, something that is dwindling as you go around the UK. So that impressed people. They also saw that we are live locally. Our children go to the school in the area of Lutterworth, but also just the work that we do, the hosting, the people that we bring in. And that afforded that local connection, the opportunity to now this year, from 15th November, Saturday the 15th November, to launch long-term an exhibition at Lutterworth Museum of the Cepher Scriptures. Now, that's something that is very, very momentous. Lutterworth is a small market town, but it is known for many things, and two of them that stand out is the Jet Engine by Frank Whittle. The other is it being the Bible Belt for all of the British Isles, the UK, for translation, for biblical translation, because of course Wycliffe had translated from the Vulgate the Bible into English for the common man. Now, keeping in that spirit, we have the modern day translation of Cepher, which is going to be giving a Hebraic understanding of scripture. And so it's a huge accomplishment because of the local connection and everything else that we are able to do this. What I am asking for is people who are located, who are situated, who live here as a ministry and individually, and you're based in the UK, especially if you are in surrounding areas such as Coventry, Leicestershire, Birmingham, Market Harborough, Rugby, London, Manchester, Yorkshire, even wider spread. We're always saying, send me and I will go. Well, you have an opportunity now. Let's stand together on this narrow path and come together for a momentous day. To stand together as a testimony of what Yah is doing is absolutely a beautiful experience. If you think about it, we've got a very big exhibition space. It's not a small exhibition space. We're able to, as you see behind me, put the Cepher collection there on exhibition, the original collector's edition of the Cepher scriptures, the Millennium edition, the new Way, the Truth, and the Life. And Stephen is working extensively on different abstract articles that we will keep on renewing and that are going to be put in a very large space with some interactive videos so people can understand, scan, take home and look at the longer video and understand what Cepher scriptures, a Hebrewic understanding is scripturally. So I'm very, very excited by this because it's just the start. It's engaging with the community to such an extent that we have 2 tours that are going to take place. So you have to book in for those tours. They are free of charge to the museum. Of course, it will be seeing the totality of the museum, but the focus will be on the launch of Cepher Scriptures, and it will be a very swift, short presentation, after which we are moving through to Lutterworth Town Hall, which is just across the road. It's been newly refurbished, decorated to such a decadent standard. It's just going to make the occasion far more celebratory. And we have a very popular nationwide string quartet orchestra. They are going to be doing 2 concerts for us for the town of Lutterworth and all the surrounding areas, which would be Market Harborough, Leicester, Rugby, Coventry. So we're putting this on for them to celebrate what we are doing as a ministry in this small market town, but now just to open it up to them. And the beauty of this is whenever this company, wherever they travel, they are so in demand, and they're going to be hosting 2 concerts for us. I want to give you a taster exactly of what they do so you understand. They set the stage by dark candle lights. It's 500 to 1,000 LED candle lights staged throughout. Absolutely beautiful, where they're sitting in the middle of it, and you just go through the different pieces that they play. The last concert that I went to was a Coldplay concert. Absolutely beautiful instrumental, such presence. And what a day, what a thing to celebrate as we continue working with the community. So let me just show you this very quickly. So we have this to look forward to, something very, very spectacular. And I'm asking our community, those who are based in the UK and Europe, to make the effort to come. Information will come out, but you can see the significance of it and what a testimony it is just to have an invitation, open invitation to engage and work with a local community. You know, when I say they're a small market village, they still have at least 2,000 people within the proximity. So we have a huge job ahead of us. Okay, so just look out for the information as it comes onto the screen during the program. Let's get into the program right now. So we are returning with our special guest, Gary Wayne, just speaking to him in the studio, and wonderful to hear that going into next year, he's reserved space so that we can get through this book. But he is now quietening down his itinerary because he's got to get on to Genesis chapter book 3. You know, and he can't do that if he keeps up with all these commitments that he has. So very excited about that because I can see that this is a subject that is in demand, and he has the research and the skill in presenting that to us, as you can see through the books. So today he is delving into section 3, which is the descendants of Anak's bloodlines and covenants. And we're specifically focusing on 3 chapters. Chapter 24, Sodom and Gomorrah. Chapter 25, the Amalekites. And chapter 26, Jethro and Caleb. So he's bringing out many scriptures, and I just brought one of them. He's going to be taking us through, I'm sure, Yahudah, the book of Jude. And I've just brought one out, chapter 1, verse 6, because it says it for itself. It's self-explanatory. And the angels which did not guard their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness and unto the judgment of the great day. That verse right there, it connects the sexual perversion of Sodom with the sexual perversion of angels, knowing that the Nephilim were actually in Sodom, in that region, at that juncture. Very fascinating. And Gary shows how that connection is firmly cemented in circumstantial evidence, which I know he will draw out. And I'm really excited for all that we're going through into today. He further goes into the descendants of Anak. And if you read in Bemidbar, that's Numbers, chapter 13, verse 22, it says, and they ascended by Negev and came unto Chevron, where Achiyman and Sheshai and Talmai, the children of Anak, were. Again, the association is to Anak. That's what I want to draw out here. That passage is describing the descendants of Anak in the same breath, in the same narrative as the Amalekites. Therefore, connecting the two to the flood narrative and the Nephilim narrative, connecting them by application and implication, which is Gary's own words. And again, he's going to go thoroughly into that. This is what I'm most excited about and looking forward to. And I really hope that we do get to the end of this chapter, into this one. In conclusion, his presentation is fascinating. I would say it's a spectacle of fascination. It's examining the line of Jethro. We know Jethro is Moses' father-in-law, other name Reuel. Well, what does that mean? R-E-U-E-L. You know, wow. Just to understand where he comes from, his daughters, who Moses may be married to, who his father could be, is fascinating. These are contexts that you have to go further than just the scripture, because so little is given in there. But he takes it further and he goes on to Caleb, the son of Jephthah, who was the Kenizzite. Now we know Caleb as one of the 12 spies, the youngest one as well. By Moses, he was sent out to explore the land of Canaan. Both he and Joshua, they entered the promised land, but that was after 14 years of a wilderness living, a wilderness journey. And Gary points out that Caleb, when he was 85 years old, he still had the skill of fighting like a warrior when he was younger, to the point that he drove away, he defeated the Achiyman from Hebron. Because of this achievement, he was rewarded as the head of the tribe of Judah. That's significant to us. We love studying about the tribe, so I know that we'll merit that very specifically. Finally, he goes on to bringing a very fascinating fact, and this is about the Kenizzite. They are a tribe that Gary presents actually have no genealogy at all, no genealogy linking them back to Noah. So how can a tribe just mysteriously descend back to Cain and to the Nephilim, inherit Hebron and the home and the capital city of Anaq? Well, we're going to find out today. And with that, I am going to welcome Gary Wayne and Stacey to the platform. Dr. Stephen may be joining us a bit later. He might be held up in class, but Gary, so excited to be going into this. There is so much here, and this is everything that there's so much meat to this today.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me back. So happy to be here and to cover some very interesting chapters. And it's kind of an odd mix of chapters that are in this section, just as what I'm leading and as we covered off in the previous shows in section 3 with the Amorites, touched on the Amalekites and the Rephaim and the Anakim. And so we're introducing peoples that aren't being talked about a lot in biblical history. And if they are, they're not represented as, as accurately as they ought to be. And we don't get from the standard dogma of Christianity coming out of the churches, we do not receive adequate information to say where these peoples came from. So what we're covering off today in these 3 chapters is an extension on this sort of idea that these are important peoples and we need to understand who they are, because it helps us understand what was so we can understand what's going to be, just as Ecclesiastics instructs us to. So, and these are all post-Diluvian people versus antediluvian. So after the flood and unaccounted for peoples in many cases. And as the book unfolds, I'll actually cover off some more people as well. As the premise sort of dictates, we need to look at who those people are. And I don't necessarily resolve all of that in book 1. I just wanted to introduce the idea because Christians are going to be challenged on this. And we better have at least an understanding whether or not you think these are people that have a patriarch that goes back to the 70 nations, and of course, most of them, all of them don't that I'm talking about, or that they somehow survived the flood, or they're different still. And I get more into that different still into book 2 on a lot of these peoples. But I want people to understand that we need to ask tough questions about what happened in prehistory to help us sort of understand. And so Sodom and Gomorrah is kind of one of those classic cases of how prehistory and prophecy have a connection, and underlines that there's something going on in Sodom and Gomorrah and the kinds of people there that is, again, underexplained and not accounted for. So when I talk about it as a connection to prophecy, we see Sodom and Gomorrah used in many of the destructions for the destruction by fire in the end time. Right? And we have talked about in shows past that the flood may have been and likely was an intercession by God so the antediluvian world would not be destroyed by fire. And so it brings the flood instead, because as 2 Peter 3 talks about, that destruction by fire is reserved for the end time. So it's interesting in the days of Noah that Jesus talks about in terms of the signs, and one of the overarching signs, we need to understand the days of Noah, both 600 years before the flood, 350 years after the flood. And then in Luke's account, it transitions not only the days of Noah, but includes Sodom and Gomorrah within those 350 years of Noah's life after the flood and that destruction by fire. And so it's telling us it's going to be a similar kind of situation leading up to what God interceded with the flood, but he's not going to intercede to stop the destruction by fire until he sends Jesus to ensure all flesh is not killed in the year of the Lord's wrath. So it's important to understand that there's important context that we need to understand if we want to understand what is coming in the end time, particularly if we're in the fig tree generation. So Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed, supernaturally. It's a preternatural event.
Right.
And it is loaded with not only the descriptions of the end time, but if we understand it as part of the days of Noah when it's being destroyed, then all of a sudden what's going on in Sodom is something that we may want to pay attention to. So Sodom and Gomorrah is not just Sodom and Gomorrah, it's actually 5 cities of the plain. It was a pentapolis city-state. And you have Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, or Zayar, as it's also called. And they formed part of a military alliance of city-states, which was a standard military setup in the land of the covenant and the surrounding areas. The most famous ones would be probably the Philistine pentapolis of the 5 cities, of the Anakim, of the Philistines, of the Cherathim, of the Avim, the Pelathim, the Cherathim, this confederacy of humans and hybrids and giants that expropriates the land that Israel doesn't deal with in the covenant wars at the time of the Exodus. And then you also mentioned Numbers 13, where we have, after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, we have scouts going into the land after the aftermath, after the geopolitical shakeup of that war that's not only happens before Sodom and Gomorrah with the war of giants, but then the destruction of the 5 cities of the plain. And we see the new sort of geopolitical setup with the scouts, but we still see the Anakim giants there in the Hebron area, which isn't very far from where Sodom and Gomorrah and the 5 cities of the plain were located. And the Anakim lived amongst the Amorites that are listed as part of those peoples. The Amorites are very much associated with Sodom and Gomorrah as well. The Canaanites are listed. The Amalekites are listed. And almost as you mentioned, as I write in the book, without a space to delineate, there's a separation. Are these hybrids? Are these humans? Or are these giants? Because they're connected so closely with the Anakite or the Anakim giants. And in the description that we're getting out of the accurate part of the report, we have the Anakim, which are understood as Rephaim giants after the flood, versus Nephilim, or Nephilim, depending on how you want to translate that, Numbers 13:33. But giants nonetheless. Maybe not as big as the antediluvian giants, and maybe a few differences, but giants nonetheless. And so we have a group of people that are in the land. Some are giants, but the other ones are still taller and more numerous than the Israelites. And we get those details confirmed in Deuteronomy 1, 40 years later with Moses. So we know the details of what Caleb and Joshua described as accurate. But again, not a whole bunch more detail as we're taught in the standard doctrine.
Yeah.
And so this is the land that, Israel is going to be moving into 40 years after their forging of their faith to take on the conquest that they're going to need to take on. And so Sodom and Gomorrah happens before this, but it explains the world so much better that Israel is dealing with if we understand Sodom and Gomorrah. And it looks like you
just cleared up a whole bunch in what you just said right there, Gary, with the 5 other cities and the fact that there were giants and hybrids there. It cleared up in my mind exactly why the people of Sodom and Gomorrah wanted to have sex with the angels instead of Lot's daughters, because they wanted to continue that, the hybrids and the giants and all that kind of stuff. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and this was part of the Ugarit religion of the Baalim. And Ugarit would be located between Tyre and Mount Hermon in the north. But the religion of Sodom and Gomorrah was the religion of Baal and his Baalim council that rules from Mount Hermon. Right? So now if we understand that, we understand that Baal is in the Ugaritic text described as the one who creates the Rephaim giants, along with his Baalim council of gods. Now we have some more context there to understand what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. And before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, there's a great war of giants in Genesis 14 versus Genesis 18 and 19, where we're going to get the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, still in the time of Abraham. And after Abraham has moved from Ur to the covenant land and is living amongst these peoples, all of these giants and hybrids, and surviving and thriving. And so we have these 5 kings. Bera is one of the kings, and that means son of evil.
What a title.
Yeah, what a title. And you have Shinbad, which is a splendor of the father. In other words, he is the shining brilliance of a shining one, right? Because the Rephaim were shining ones. And from his father. And Shemiber means lofty, as in lofty ones, from the fallen angels. And and Bela means swallow up and destroy. And Bel is the first syllable for Baal. So they're showing in their names and the titles whom they worship as their gods. And these are Rephaim or Perazim or other kinds of giants that are ruling. And they're totally intermixed with the Canaanites as well, who are worshiping the same gods and become hybrids after the flood. So this is a mix of everything you don't want to see so quickly after the flood. And this is where Canaan goes to shed off his curse, because Canaan should go to Africa.
Mm-hmm.
as son of Ham,
Right.
where the land is allotted for them.
Mm.
But he settles in the land of the covenant where the giants are already living after Babel. And he's probably, supplying daughters to produce the giants for.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I cover that
Excellent.
off in book 2 as well. So now
Mhm.
you're starting to see so many different sort of rabbit holes and things that,
Mhm.
if we ask just a few questions, what starts to happen.
Mhm.
And so when we look at these kings that are ruling over the Pentapolis, these are giant kings with their dynasties
Mhm.
and with a connection back to the Ugarit giants, which was the city of Og, as you look at that in Hebrew. So Kiriath city, you have UG, which comes from OWG for Og, and UWG for round and stout, right? For Og, because he was a Rephaim giant. He was the last of the giants, Rephaim.
Mhm.
And that would have been his original city. And after the War of Giants in Genesis 14, after the giant kings from Mesopotamia come in and return the 5 city states back to being a vassal state,
Mm.
and the Rephaim are destroyed in the Mount Hermon region, as Genesis 14 describes, which are the first armies that the 4 king alliance out of Mesopotamia take on because they're the protectors of the Sodom and Gomorrah state, Pentapolis. King Og is going to move to Mount Hermon, be king over the Amorites after that destruction happens. So you have one of the greatest wars being fought over this Pentapolis, who rebels from the the third dynasty, who is going to take on the geopolitical network of the land of the covenant and the various alliances of these giants that I break down in book 2, like the Northern Alliance, the Eastern Alliance, the Southern Alliance. I won't go through all of them because that's not in book 1, but understand there's a complete military alliance in each area that are also working together within the covenant land. And again, I mean, we have these. I won't go through all because this isn't really the place to do it, but you can go through the names of the kings coming out of Mesopotamia and take them back to giants as well. And I do all of that in book 2. So for example, Arioch means lion-like, like lion-like men of Moab.
Right.
Offspring of probably Nergal, the Sumerian war god, which had a lion's head, and that the Avim worshipped in their one of their settlements that's more closer to the Mesopotamian region. So this is a war that's probably the greatest war fought since the flood. Who knows how long afterwards, where you have this great military alliance. Even King Tidal is of the Hurrian giants, the Hurim, as I will break them down into book 2. And they're just sort of considered as kind of Gentile nation, but no, they're the Hurrians. They're a sister branch to the Hivim and the Horim in the covenant land. They're just more of the north and of the east. And so Sodom and Gomorrah is a city that Abraham has settled into, and then he's got to take on this alliance of kings to save Lot, right? And then Lot's going to become an important figure within the Sodom and Gomorrah story, which is going to happen a few chapters later. And the land that Abraham is being awarded in Genesis 15, right after saving Lot, right after receiving the blessings from Melchizedek, and after the giant war, is going to have nations that are including giants within them. So, I mean, you have, for example, the Rephaim that are listed in the area of the land that he has. One of the two areas where Rephaim are listed as a tribe of giants is Genesis 15 and Genesis 14 in the War of Giants. Other than that, we basically will see a translation as giant, sometimes as Valley of the Rephaim, which Valley of Giants is the standard translation. And so you also have like the Perizzites or the Perazim. No, I don't cover them off that in detail in book 1, but I get to them in book 2. And they're distinct from the Canaanites, associated with them, but distinct, and no patriarch. And then you have what I call the triple K, which is kind of an introduction into Caleb, as we'll hopefully get to him later in the show, is that you have the Kenites, the Kenizzites, and the Cadmonites. And I would say Cadmonim, Kenazim, and Kenim. But I don't get there into book 1. I'm just introducing the idea as I get downstream of these peoples that don't have patriarchs. None of them have patriarchs. And in the land that Abraham is being awarded, they're living.
So it's fair, Gary, is it fair to say that those kings that Abraham went after, the 5 kings that he slaughtered, they were giants?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. They were. Yeah.
So Abraham must have been a pretty big guy himself.
Well, very powerful, probably given additional strength, because how could you go from, well, he left the land of Nimrod and giants.
Yeah.
Right. And Nimrod presents the bloodline down to Chedorlaomer, who's the king of the no, he's not the king of the the third, but he's the tax collector of the the third dynasty. But the the third dynasty is a direct descendancy in kingships down through Nimrod, Gilgamesh, and is the alliance that's going to come into the Mesopotamian region. So as we look at how that sort of plays out is that this is an individual that not only is going to rebel against Nimrod, not only against the Babel religion that Nimrod is imposing, now he's going to go from there and go into another region infested with hybrids and giants, who he is a stranger amongst. We're not told he's trained in war. And he's going to create the nation of Israel, as downstream and the offspring, and it's going to come through right after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah with a miracle impregnation for Sarah, and who was promised that just before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? So the interrelationships of the details within the Bible are just so incredible. But the only way he could survive, would he have had great wisdom? Absolutely. But he would have had to have been supported by supernatural strength. And the people that he's going to take with him are chieftains of the Amorites. They're hybrids. Their warriors are going to be giants and hybrids as well, that he's going to go take on this great army with. And to have that respect of the giants, he had the absolute respect of everybody in Canaan, and they're all ruled by giant kings throughout the Pentapolis. And for people who may not be familiar with some of this stuff in terms of the Pentapolis, just let me throw out that King Og was the greatest leader of the Pentapolis. He had 60 cities, 12 Pentapolis cities working both east and west of the Jordan River under his reign. I don't know how many Sihon had, because we don't get all of the cities listed or a total number. I think I listed 34. So he may have had 7 Pentapolis, or he may have had 8, but a little bit lesser than King Og. But if we want to understand the military complex that was the covenant land, we need to understand that these were organized Pentapolis city-states, and that Sodom and Gomorrah would be a shining city on a hill. So they built these great cities as fortresses with high walls, as Numbers 13 describes. that go up to heaven for giants and and roaming giant armies, right? Just everything starts to fall into place here. And that this was not a city of evil for polytheists, and still is not. It is the city of knowledge. It is the city where the gods, according to the Gnostics in Sodom and Gomorrah, Gomorrah was the seed where giants were created before the flood in Gnosticism. And Sodom is the seed where they begin after the flood through the Baalim. Baal is the son of El, who was a parent god who ruled before the flood. So now again, we start to see the shining city of light where not only the giants walked amongst humans, but so did the gods for a short time, up until at least the time of Babel, maybe longer, but it does come to an end because they no longer walk like they amongst the humans as they did before the flood. But it's the same things that are going on after the flood that went on before the flood in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Sodom is known as the city of light. We would know that better in the Arthurian legend of Camelot. Lot being a name tagged onto Camel, which is curved light, shining city of Lot, as it would be understood there. But understand that Camelot is an allegory for Sodom and Gomorrah, shining cities on a hill of knowledge and polytheism. And so when we see that term, we need to understand that's a polytheist term. So if people want to call Washington a shining city on a hill or just a shining city, understand what they're talking about in their language. That city is being used to bring about the New World Order, that I like to call the Nephilim world order, bring it back to a state where they would like to have it, when like it was very close to being just before the flood came. So Sodom and Gomorrah is thought about completely different by the polytheists than the monotheists. And we look at Sodom and Gomorrah as a place that was totally the antithesis of what should happen in a civilization. Not only the gods, but the behavior and the creation of the giants. And so when we get descriptions in the Bible, we get all sorts of heresies attributed to Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is going to be what the last 7 years looks like on earth. So we have a post-Diluvian reference that is very much akin to what happened before the flood, just as Jude 1 makes a connection to Sodom and Gomorrah right after the reference to the angels that were put in prison. Right? And so does 2 Peter and 1 Peter make that same reference. So we need to understand the days of Noah in the context of what was going on before and after the flood. And then that word of strange flesh, well, maybe we should, that they're fornicating with, and fornicating can include all sorts of sexual behavior. But we understand that strange flesh with the word that comes down through history from Sodoma as being a sexual act between 2 males. Right? And so when we look at that, but now we look at that word strange flesh, which is the Greek word heteros. It doesn't necessarily say it's between 2 males or between 2 females or anything like that. What it actually says is it means other, a different kind, and a different kind of flesh, something unique that the inhabitants want the daughters of Lot, no, the angels, to have sex with. Lot offers his daughters to try and prevent this abomination from happening. But we don't know whether or not they want to have, from the text in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, we don't have text whether or not this is a same-sex act that they want to have. Or is this that they want the males who do most of the speaking by the looks of the text, want to have the angels change into a female form because they have changeling quality, just as they're able to create a male body become a physical being to walk amongst them and be the judges for Sodom and Gomorrah. So we have an example that they can create their own oikotarian. And or do they want those angels to have sex with daughters of their offspring, just as the traditional way as we understand giants being created through the daughters? We don't know. But what we do know is that this is a very good place and a likelihood place where the giants were created after the flood for the what I would call the second incursion. Not to dismiss that giants may not survive the flood as well, but we get accounts in the Sumerian tradition, we get accounts in the Greek tradition, we get accounts in the Ugaritic text and other places that there's another creation of giants after the flood. So we want to be...
King Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. So the same thing that was going on back then, they were walking around us, amongst us. They're doing that now, only they were bold about it then, and the people knew who they were. We just don't, well, some of us do, but most people don't recognize who they are walking around us. And that strange flesh could be Scythian, which is, the cloning, but we're not going to that, but the Scythian beings that are soulless that are walking amongst us as well.
Yes, and the Scythians are a completely different group of people, as are recorded in history, and related to the giants. But that's another rabbit hole. So this conversation is also recorded in 2 Peter 2 as a filthy conversation. So again, what is it referring to in terms of filthy? Well, it's also connected in 2 Peter 2 to the crimes the angels did at the time of the flood. So again, this is defined as it's a Greek word, selgia, that means licentious, lustful, uninhibited sex, no boundaries to the sex. And this is the filthy conversation that's going on. So could it just be for same sex as we've been taught? Or do we need to understand that there's no boundaries to what was being discussed there? And that their purpose may have been because the Rephaim giants after the flood had a fertility issue, that they wanted to regenerate that species with new giants. And so now we have a completely different understanding. And again, not to dismiss that those other crimes didn't go on and sins in Sodom and Gomorrah, because they did. But we need to understand, if this conversation, this filthy conversation, and strange flesh, as in another kind, another species, what are they referring to? Are they referring to the giants, that they wanted to have sex with the giants, or the humans? Or are they talking about angels that create their own flesh so that they can pass on their DNA, which would be a different kind as well, right? And so I think we need to understand that there's a connection here to what we need to prepare ourselves for the end time.
Yeah, that's part of what they did with King Og's bed. They used the bed for sexual magic and rituals that they used after.
Yeah, well, and those rituals were designed with those beds to create new offspring.
Right.
And you even see some reliefs in the Middle East where you see these giants and these human females, and they're pouring semen into the females with a vial on a bed. And so one of the ways that the giants are going to likely first procreate to continue, because they're not producing enough females, is they're going to go to Canaanite females and peoples of other lands, and they may not be physically able, because of the size, to do that. So they begin with the first hybrids, insemination, so to speak. And so then you create the hybrid females so that you can start directly procreating with them and keep the bloodline as pure as possible.
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, do we see an example of that in this time period? We absolutely do.
Mm-hmm.
And we get that with the Horim in the south.
Mm-hmm.
We get that with Esau marrying Aholibama and Eliphaz marrying Timnah, both Horim pureblood females to start new dynasties and hybrid races. So we have an example with the add-on to what I call the Table of Nations in Genesis 36. We have, again, a better understanding of what's going on, that there are these hybrids that are being created. And all of a sudden, it starts to make sense what's being talked about in the report of the spies, of the scouts in Numbers 13, that there's the giants and there's people that are taller and more numerous than the Israelites.
Right.
Because the only giants that we're actually told about are the three kings, Sheshai, Achiyman, and Talmai. But that doesn't mean there aren't others, right?
Right. Yeah. And just so they know it's biblical, Gary, it's in the scriptures. It's scriptural in the book of Job, and I'm sure you know where that is, where it says dead things are formed underwater, which are the Raphaim. So
yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's why it's important to get into the original Hebrew to understand some of the translations, because you don't get the whole meaning unless you get there. If you don't understand that Rapha 7495 is the root word meaning healer, just as the Raphaim were healers of themselves and others in the Ugaritic text, that is the source word for spirit and death as it's translated, an evil spirit 7496, and the source word for giant 7497, and they're all interrelated, talking about the same group of people. And one being a disembodied spirit, one being a bodied spirit, then you don't get the full understanding. You just get dead.
Right.
But dead in terms of a giant whose spirit doesn't go to sleep.
Right. And regenerates. And just like you said, they regenerate. So this is why King David had to cut Goliath's head off so he couldn't regenerate.
Yeah. And you know what's also interesting, I'll just throw this one out because it just popped into my head, is that in the time when Jesus comes, and he's going to be going to John the Baptist to be baptized and start his commission. And just after John does the baptizing, John is captured by King Herod. And then he has his head taken because he's fearful of the healing that he's able to do and the other miracles. He wants to make sure he's going to stay dead because he thinks he may be a Nephilim bloodline like I am. Like Herod means hero, as in a hero as in a giant. And he's an Edomite Horim or Amalekite descendant or both who's on the throne. And he wants to kill the Messiah, with no surprise there with the bloodlines and all the things that they did. But then Jesus starts preaching and doing miracles in the Galilee. And King Herod freaks out. Why does he freak out? Because he thinks it's John. And he doesn't know how this could be because he took his head to make sure he would still be dead. But he thinks Jesus is John the Baptist. And he's just absolutely beside himself. So now it gives you, again, you have an understanding of why the reaction and the taking of the head of John. So it's an interesting lesson for people to always dig deeper and learn more, and it just helps you with understanding the scriptures a little bit better. So that's kind of Sodom and Gomorrah, and why I wanted to get it on the table in book 1 was that this is a model that comes down through history. So when we see all of the castles and fortresses that were built down through the ages, that's the model that begat in the early post-Diluvian period by the giants, who were nothing but warrior people and rivals, and still are to this day. So the royales continued to build these castles. And we get, and in book 2, I'll get into all the breakdown of these words of the high walls and and they're actually described in the definition as a castle, right? Only these are monstrous sized castles. So now that brings Camelot and its city and castle even into a closer relationship to what we talked about as being a polytheist story about the recreation of the new Atlantis and the ring lords, the circle table, the round table of kings that are in this alliance to bring about the new Atlantis. And you have Uther Pendragon, who fathers King Arthur. So this is another Pendragon, King Arthur being a king of Tuatha De Danann giant, Scythian, and Queen Guinevere, which basically, whose name when you take that back to Old Irish, basically means a banshee or a spirit or a Raphaim spirit. And she's a fairy queen. She's the matriarchal bloodline of the Tuatha De Danann. So the whole stories and the entertainment we get coming down is based on older history. And that's why you have so many names of biblical characters, not necessarily Christian or Judaic, coming down in those stories that populate the literature. So, but anyways, I'm down another rabbit hole, so I'll back my way out of that. So, any more questions on Sodom and Gomorrah? It was a city of Amorites. It was a city of Canaanites, all hybrids, all associated with giants.
Well, that's the best context I've ever heard for Sodom and Gomorrah. You only get very basic, and you wonder, well, why? You just given context to it. Why did they want to have sex with the angels, and the meaning for Sodom and Gomorrah? I wasn't aware of it to the extent that you explained it in the way that you did. Absolutely quite fascinating. So many different things like that. It's
well, and one of those kings that comes from Mesopotamia, Amraphel, that's a compounded word. You got Rapha in there. You got Am as in a people. You got this king that is associated with the Amorites, or at least from a name sort of perspective. At least the Amorites are going to sort of associate with them, and that he is a giant king that is coming in to reestablish his control over that covenant land. And it's absolutely astounding that we don't get more information about how important the Sumerian influence was on the covenant land region, early after the flood, and continued after the War of Giants. And after Sodom and Gomorrah, you actually have the Amorites who are going to overthrow the third dynasty. And I'm trying to think of the name. Hammurabi can have an H or start with an A, and you have names of kings with that transliteration without the H that are in the Ugaritic text kings list that King Og ruled over and was king of the Amorites. And the Amorites seem to take revenge on the Mesopotamians and take over the Babylon dynasty for a few hundred years. So again, this mix and this how things go back and forth in the Middle East, again, is under explained, but helps us to understand how these dynasties interacted and why we need to follow the giant dynasties right through to the beast empires.
That's really amazing. I think you need to look at starting up a museum with all these different type of exhibits. All the information. We don't have one, to be honest, like that, do we? So
it's called the Smithsonian. It has all the real information.
They do, and the Vatican. They just don't let anybody see it.
Exactly. They don't let anybody see it. But
let me just read this. This is from your site. I found it this morning, actually, one of the Facebook groups that you have, and it just gives an itemization of each different giant. I found it quite fascinating, and I know others will here too. So this is written by Gary. The giants from the union of the fallen angels and human women, Genesis chapter 6, verses 1-4, were remembered in both scripture and Jewish tradition as being of immense stature, strange beauty, and terrifying power. Though destroyed in the flood, giants appear again in the post-flood world. How they returned is not fully known, though scripture makes clear that Israel encountered them in the promised land. The first and most infamous were the Nephilim, towering figures of immense stature. Ancient writings describe their appearance as radiant yet dreadful, pale or bronze-like skin, hairy, fiery red or white as wool, and eyes shining like flames or piercing blue, giving them an otherworldly and fearsome countenance. The post-flood races of giants were collectively known as the Rephaim. This word is used in scripture not only for mighty warriors, but also for shades of the dead in Sheol. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 9, a reminder that they were under Yah's judgment and doomed to punish. The Rephaim were like the greatest of the post-flood giants, with later generations appearing as the angelic bloodlines thinned. Jewish tradition remembers these giants under distinct names, each describing their terror and downfall. Nephilim, fallen ones, both for their angelic origin and violent fall. Genesis 6:4, with shining faces, lightning like eyes, and hair white as snow, flaming like fire, they embodied both majesty and terror. Rephaim, linked with weakness and death, their very presence melted men's hearts like wax. Job 26, verse 5, Psalms 88, verse 10, said to have pale skin, sunken yet fiery eyes, and elongated limbs with like phantoms. The Gibberim, mighty ones, renowned for unnatural strength. Genesis 6:4, broad-shouldered with flashing metallic-like eyes and wild dark hair. The Zayim, the potters or murmurers, fierce warriors whose cries froze armies in fear. Deuteronomy 2, verse 20, depicted with black hair, bronze-like skin, and eyes like burning coals. The Amalekites, descendants of Anak, remembered for their towering height. Numbers 13:33, ruddy-skinned, heavy beard with piercing green or grey eyes. The Avim, a people brought to ruin whose giants once ravaged the land before being destroyed. Deuteronomy 2, verse 23, giants, ghost-like in appearance, their skin pale as ash. And Emin, the fallen, fearful ones, for their ghastly appearance struck dread into all that saw them. Deuteronomy 2, verse 10, described with reddish or tarry hair, towering stature, and roaring voices like thunder. Best explanation I've ever had. Saw that, and so I thought I'm going to copy that and paste that for my own notes. And then you were just talking about it today. I thought, okay, we've got to share that.
Yes, good.
Yeah, they were different when they're talking about other flesh. They were hybrids, so they were half human, half angelic, and I can't imagine going up with something that they had the voices as powerful as Atlas as he shook the earth when his voice spoke. I mean, I know that's hyperbole, but I mean, their voice would bring fear and foreboding, let alone they were called shining ones because their eyes lit up and it would light up a whole room. So when they spoke, you can imagine this booming voice, this shining eye. Then imagine this huge elongated serpentine skull. And that they were a 2-to-1 height to width ratio. So they were stout, stocky, muscular. I mean, their feet must have been, in modern sort of understanding, over 30 on a shoe size. I mean, to support that weight. And Josephus, I've got a quote here I have beside me. He describes these are post-diluvian giants. And this is in Antiquities, Book 5, Chapter 2, Verse 3. It says, for which reason they removed their camp to Hebron. So this is at the time of the Exodus. And when they had taken it, they slew all of the inhabitants. There were till then left the race of giants who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing.
Mhm.
The bones of these men are still shown to this very day, unlike to any credible relations of other men. So their bioengineering was completely different. And these are post-Diluvian giants. You can only imagine what the antediluvian giants posed, or if one survived into the post-Diluvian world, what they were like, because he's describing the ones in Hebron, which are Rephaim-related giants.
Yeah.
And that's the time of Jesus. That's the time bones are still on display that people would travel to go see.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, knowing all that size and that power they have, this is why Yahushua told Zechariah in 4:6, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit. That's why Abraham was able to destroy them, because it's about Yahweh's spirit, not these offspring of these fallen beings. They're nothing still. So I just want to make that plain, real believers that carry the Ruach HaKodesh inside of us, these beings are nothing to us. So
and
it's not us, it's the power of the Most High. So,
and even in the time of the Exodus, and we get the strange account 3 times in the Old Testament about how God was going to deliver up the giants to the Israelites. And 3 times it says he's going to send hornets. So why hornets? And I could never figure that out till I was watching a science show, and I learned that the hornets were the natural enemy of the bee. Well, the imagery in polytheism is the bee, the mother goddess, the hive, and the male drones that are below the female queen, and that they have an ability, and it's believed in their belief system that the original giants and who knows how far downstream not only had powers like healing, but telepathy, and they would be in constant communication. So now if you put the hornets, the natural enemy of the bee, they would discombobulate the giants and they can't communicate. And they've never experienced that before. And so the Israelites are just able to sort of come up. They probably take them out at the knee, have them come down, and then take the head.
Yeah, absolutely. So those stories are real in the mythology. Gary Fee 5 Fum, they hunted by DNA. They can smell us. They can smell.
They can, yes.
Yeah.
That's not there for an interesting rhyme. I mean, I mean, the nursery rhymes are absolutely grotesque in terms of what they're really talking about. That's taught to the children to get them used to the idea of these different types of beings and things. And so, and they had not only a bad habit and a bad lust for drinking our blood, but also eating our flesh. And that's all sort of expressed in that nursery rhyme and in the story, and underlined by Fee Fi Fo Fum. I wonder what those words really meant in the ancient giant languages.
Right. This is true.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We live so close to the theme park Gulliver's Land. Of course, that is another giant, but one that's, well, we've got a couple of theme parks all Gulliver's based, where they tie him up, the little people, and he's laying down captured. Yeah. Oops, sorry to mean that.
Yeah. So do you want to move on to the Amalekites?
Yes, please.
So I did a separate chapter on the Amalekites because they're to me, when I was beginning my research, were as unique as the Amorites, and why I wanted to devote special attention to the Amorites as well. And so these are a people, again, that are inexplicable. So typically people will say, well, the Amalekites would come from Timnah and Eliphaz. Well, but that's Genesis 36. That's a few hundred years after the War of Giants. And I'm not saying they didn't name their son Amalek, because they did. And I'm not saying that they didn't procreate a group of hybrids, because they did. But in Genesis 14, we have the Amalekites in the War of Giants. along with the Horites, or the Horim, as they're described in Deuteronomy 2 as giants. So now you have either a conflict and the Bible is inaccurate, or there's something more going on. Because you can't have the Amalekites show up before their patriarch shows up to produce that tribe.
Right. Mm.
So the giants that are in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants have an interesting relationship with the hybrids, and they're going to become one nation in around the Petra region. And there's other locations for the Amalekim in the east as well. But Amalek will move to Petra after he becomes an adult and is going to be intermixed with them and the Amalekim giants that are located in the Petra area. So if we look at passages that are referring to the Amalekites throughout the Old Testament, we have to start to think about, are they referring to the hybrids? Or are they referring to the giants? Or is it both? So again, in Numbers 13:33, not 13:33, but Numbers 13 in the report, the Amalekites are listed. Now, are those the hybrids or are those the giants? Or is it both? And we're not told. Oh, because if you take that back, I mean, you get it back to a singular patriarch, right? It's as all the giant tribes go down back into Hebrew, whether it's Hori for Horim, that's the singular form, and that's if it's Hivi for the Hivim, and so on and so forth. I won't go through all the different names, but you do not get the plural format for the people, just the singular format. Just as Rapha shows up, Raphaim is the male plural, and as shown as a tribe as it's translated, but we only get Rapha, the singular. So again, it's a constant referring back to the patriarchs. And so the Amalekites were there, and a fierce nation from ancient times, as they're described. Well, that's an odd term. But it is used consistently in the Bible for before the flood.
Right.
So is it now saying that these are giants that survived the flood? Or is it saying this was maybe one of the first nations to be created after the flood? Again, we're not given that distinction, but the descriptions would have you think very closely that the Amalekim are a very important tribe living in a very important city that was an antediluvian city where 2/3 of it is underground, unlike what we're told. We only see a small portion of the Petra location, and that they're in a land of, that's very, very closely associated with the covenant land in the general region for sure. And they're the most powerful, feared nation of that time. Well, if you're the most feared nation, you are going to be a giant nation, right? Because you're not going to be a human nation, and you're probably not going to be the hybrid nation. So we have these giants that show up. We have a conflict that most people ignore in terms of how the people show up. The only way to resolve that, there's two separate peoples here. And that Timnah and Eliphaz name Amalek, to create a new tribe, a new dynasty with a new fairy, red-haired fairy queen. Give him an eponymous name, and then they're going to go live amongst the people that they're named eponymously at, because the Horim were part of the southern alliance with the Amalekim giants, and to a certain degree, some of the Anakim and some of the Avim giants. So there was a little closer relationship there than people would have us think about. But again, another super alliance. It's the alliance that the Philistines expropriate just before the Exodus. And then it was going to absorb some of the Avim and the Anakim amongst the Philistine Pentapolis. for the Philistine Confederacy. So again, understanding prehistory, we need to understand these alliances. And again, I don't cover the alliances in book 1. I get to that in book 2 because I'm going a little bit further into the story and providing additional details. But what I am introducing here is a concept of these Amalekites, Amalekim giants, are not only in the covenant land, but they come from the east.
Right.
Interesting.
Now, as we take them back, they had a close association with Adramelech or Adramelech. And basically you have in there some compounded words for Melech. It can mean king or an angel. And Adar is part of the Adram part, which was a transliteration of Baal. So if you see biblically Adar, A-D-A-R, or Hadar, or Hadad, those are all Sumerian names for Baal.
Gotcha.
So now you see that Eastern connection with a Baal connection. So now, again, you're saying, okay, as I'm looking at this, are they created after the flood or are they survivors from the flood?
Right.
But they're distinct amongst the giants in the covenant land. So I still leave that question open, even though I'm a heavy fan of second incursion.
Yeah. So it's probably both, though. I mean, I'm sure there was a second incursion, but what is saying in scripture? It says that he destroyed everything. Yah destroyed everything that breathes out of his nostrils. And those giants, you know, they were part fallen beings, so they didn't need to breathe. They could breathe underwater. They could hide in the water.
Well, yeah, I mean, God permits free will, right?
Right.
And so the angels were still acting. I mean, this was an intercession to let the story continue so that all of the names in the book of life would have an opportunity to leave their names in the book of life or have it blotted out. But that doesn't mean God, as Alpha Omega, didn't understand that the giants or the angels were still going to be interacting, and they're going to help their offspring.
Right.
Either in the earth, in the water, under, in another dimension, off the earth, on an ark, on a whatever the hundreds of different ways. Well, there's probably not hundreds, but all the different ways that polytheism describes how giants survive the flood. So God knew that they would do that. But again, that wasn't the point. It was the point to ensure that all the names in the book of life created from before creation will have their opportunity, their gift to choose God or not. And so when we look at the giants that show up after the flood, we have to be open to the idea that from at least a legal perspective and a possibility that they survived. Maybe how the polytheists say, maybe differently. We don't know. But we do get accounts out of polytheism, how they do survive. And in Genesis 6 and Genesis 7, God said, I will destroy everything on the earth that I created except for what's on the ark. He did not create the giants. It's the fallen angels did. So if you're a legalist, and I try not to be a legalist because I look at that as more the wisdom of the world, but the wording suggests that leaves a crack that the fallen angels were able to have some of their offspring survive. But again, we get accounts of second incursion too. So, but maybe they wanted to create more. There wasn't enough of them, or something else was going on.
That's a key point that you just said. Their offspring. Any one of us that have children, we're going to do whatever we can to take care of our children, to protect them. So if we have that capability like they have, the supernatural, They're going to do anything supernatural they can to take care of theirs.
One of the names I wanted for book 1 is not how secret societies and the descendants and giants and plan on to slave humankind. I really wanted it to say how they plan to destroy humankind from the face of the earth, because that was the true goal.
Yeah.
The fallen angels, this is me sort of ad-libbing. I give more information on it in book 2, but the fallen angels know how powerful God is.
Oh, yeah. He's all
and they knew why humans were created. So they wanted to try and make sure that humankind was not going to reach or will reach their destiny. And so to keep blood off their own hands, they created offspring as the visible ones on the earth to do their dirty work, which is just destroy the world by fire.
Right.
Right? And to have humankind completely rebel against God and prove their case from a lawyer's perspective that, can we have a treaty, have the earth on our own and live in a separate realm? So when we look at that understanding, it makes sense that what is going on within the world, even though they're governed by the invisible ones, they're doing their parents' beckoning. The celestial, whatever the celestial mafia godfathers want, they're going to do. But the fallen angels put some distance into that. So now you have this interesting race that now we have a combined race of hybrids that are going to grow up in Petra between the giants and the hybrid giants that is going to be interacting with the Horim and the Edomite bloodline down through the Edomite kings. And then if you understand that Eliphaz is the son of Esau, and he is the brother of Jacob, who through means other than you would like to see gained the blessing and the Messianic promise and the inheritance from Esau, who was the firstborn, who biblically was shown, although he's documented as eventually forgiving Jacob, but wanted to kill Jacob for that. You can see his reaction as why he might create through Oholibama and then through his son Eliphaz hybrid races in preparation for taking back the holy inheritance, the holy promise of the Messiah, and replace it with a dragon Messiah and of the blessings. And so now you have this, and I think it's both the giants and the hybrids that are going to show up as Israel escapes out of Egypt. And they're going to run into the Amalekim who are chasing them. And for anybody who is straggling, they're killing off those people. They're trying to entice people to come to their cousins and have a meal, and then would slaughter them, as other accounts not biblically recorded, but did horrible things in the time of the Exodus. And so they're the ones who are the most militaristic people of that time. And they're going to do battle with Israel at Rephidim, or Rephidim, however you want to pronounce that. And that this is a ragtag nation of slaves not trained in war, who has no manufacturing capability of any significance to make weapons, not having any sort of strategy, who is now going to have to fight for their existence against the hybrid giant alliance at Rephidim. And it's a battle of unequal proportions, unlike anything that's ever seen. And only through God's intercession with people holding Moses's arms up do they win the war. But when Moses' arms tire, they start to lose the battle in that day. But it's starting the process of how Israel is going to have to rely on God if they're going to take the land of the covenant. But what the Amalekites were trying to do is wipe Israel from the face of the earth. That's exactly what they had stated. And that was never forgiven. And the Israelites, Moses and Joshua, were told to write this information down. And then accompanied with a prophecy that when you choose a king down the road, which he doesn't want them to do, but he knows they're going to do, then that's when you're going to wipe the Amalekites from the face of the earth. And the Amalekites never really take them on directly again. After that battle with the thumping they took, they enticed all the other giant nations to war against Israel and not let them take the land. They worked with some of the eastern peoples because there's Amalekim and Amalekites and hybrids that were living east there that are working during the time of the judges against Israel. And they are considered worse than the Philistines. Because of what they did, even though the Philistines are going to be their real nemesis after taking lands in the covenant area. That David is going to have to take care of both when he becomes king after King Saul. And the Amalekites, if they wipe Israel from the face of the earth, the law would be they would inherit the Messiah promise. They would inherit Israel's inheritance and the blessings. They would have put a giant hybrid Nephilim, Rephaim, Antichrist figure on that throne in the covenant land.
Legally. Right.
And so when we get this account of what's going on, Rephidim, everything is at play here. Everything. And that they continue with this ideology that they want to have a dragon bloodline. Dragon as associates it with their imagery of their gods from seraphim angels.
Right.
Right. Through the beast empires down the road, that they're always trying to get control of the world, just as they were trying to do before the flood, and then present their Antichrist type figure. And when we look at Michael, he fights against the beast empires. He doesn't fight against them coming to power. He fights from them from not permitting Antichrist to come to power, I think. And so we get that example in the book of Daniel where he fights against Persia, and then he's got a fight against Greece after that. And then in the book of Daniel. And so Michael actually sits down because he's seen seated in Daniel 12 at the start of the last 3.5 years. Well, that's when Antichrist is crowned and does the abomination. Then you have the war in heaven, as Revelation 12 talks about. And you have Michael leading the army of angels from heaven against Satan and his angels. And Daniel 8:10, you have Antichrist who is going to magnify himself to be godlike status and to actually enter into heaven and to throw down some of the starry host and trample on them. And so Nimrod was trying to do that as well, as what we talked about in previous shows. And is an Antichrist type figure. So that's not permitted to happen. Nimrod didn't complete what he wanted to do, and any of the beast empires that come along are not able to do what they want to do, but they all have Antichrist type figures, whether it's Julius Caesar, whether it's Alexander. You can go through all the various kings of all of the 6 empires that have come, but they never reached the goal of Antichrist status. But we could imagine a completely different history if Israel gets wiped from the face of the earth at that point in time. And that this sin is so great that in the time of King Saul, when he's crowned, he has to fulfill his covenant obligations to wipe the Amalekites from the face of the earth. And he doesn't wipe out King Agag,
Right.
who is a giant.
Mm-hmm.
And he loses his throne. And David comes as king and finishes off the Amalekites, and also takes care of the Philistines and the Edomites and the Syrians as well in those wars. But I find it absolutely astonishing if you consider the politics and the power that is being exercised at that point in time, and why we should know more about who these Amalekites were. And do they have any relationship to the bloodlines of the Antichrist that will eventually make his way in the end time? We don't know. We're not given those bloodlines. We are told there is a branch of the terrible ones in Isaiah 25 that will be destroyed on a mountain in the end time, and that the seed of those in Psalms 21, 8 or 10 are going to be removed from the children of men in the fiery wrath in the end time as well. So we know there's bloodlines that still exist that are going to be at play in the end time, but this was a power play of unprecedented proportions against a nation that wasn't ready for war. And it's just the beginning after the Egyptian army. I mean, it's just shortly after the Egyptian army was destroyed in the Red Sea. Unbelievable, the events that are taking place at that point in time.
It's an amazing story once you put it all together, and you know this, just like you were talking about in the previous show, these beings, these giants were cannibals. So it brings a whole new light when David has his prayer, when he says, as the enemy came to eat up my flesh, they stumble and fell. Well, that's true. They really came.
Very good. Very good. Touche. Very good.
Oh, man.
Excellent context. You just given so much context, which will be so new unless you've read the book, and it's new, and you can go to seminary and not understand this. You'll get a 1 hour lecture to cover all of this, and then you walk away with your qualification. It's a lifetime of study is what you've done. Yeah,
it's good stuff putting it all together, Gary.
Yeah, it's I think it starts with being a contrarian or a Berean. I like but if you can ask the right questions, and we're told not to ask the right questions.
Right.
We're actually told we are asking the right questions, but we're being dumbed down not to ask the right questions. So the easy situation in this case is that giants weren't real. So don't ask any questions about why they're talked about.
Right.
Just ask the questions about why the Bible would say such silly things. And that you have contradictions in the Bible. Not to ask questions about why and how people like you've got the Amalekites showing up before their patriarch does.
Right.
And nobody pursuing how that could be, even though we have information that is out there that would help us understand what's going on. And we're never told about the preternatural nature of the additional of the table of nations of giant peoples intermarrying with the descendants of Esau in Genesis 36.
Right.
I mean, and those dukes are the Elohim, as the Catholic Church, Aleph in the singular, in the singular form, but as in a plural, it's the Elohim. And this is understood as by the Catholic writers as a separate race of dukes. They're the original dukes of Edom. And that's the root word for elf and elven and fairy of the fair folk giants who had fair skin.
I see. Right.
Yeah. So
except when they're giants and these are tiny, but they're a form of it.
Yeah. And so when I talk about the matriarchal fairy bloodline, and you have Timnah as a classic example of the matriarch, and that they believe their genes for the Rh negative blood passes on through the female,
Right.
and that the royals all have, for the most part, Rh negative blood of whatever form. O would be the most pure form. That's what the Windsors would have, and that this becomes an allegory not only in Gnosticism for Albigensianism and Elby, but also for the little people of the fairies, but the giant fairies, which are the Sheh people, Sidhe, the Sidhe, the She. It's pronounced 1,000 different ways. These are the Tuatha De Danann, giants that are both before and after the flood, according to polytheism. So when we see fairy tales, what's the allegory for? It's a genealogy of matriarchal bloodlines.
And it's getting ready to be October, November, December. So this is the time that people unknowingly go out and celebrate these things. They buy those little duendes, those little dwarf things that are elves, and they put on gods and things, and they have no idea what they're doing. It's sad.
And then anything to do with dragon is the patriarchal bloodline. So again, when we go back to King Arthur, you have Uther Pendragon, father of Arthur Pendragon, chief dragon, chief, right? And then you have a fairy queen with Guinevere.
Don't forget Merlin, the fallen. He's a fallen being.
Yeah. And so much imagery put into him, but he's representing the polytheist religion, which is the organizational structure. He's depicted like a wizard or a magi of the ring lords, ring lord tradition in Ring of the Lord of the Rings before the flood, the Atlantean magicians. Yeah, there's everything that goes into the fairy tales and the giant royale literature, the Aryans, the noble ones, is reflecting in an interesting story, whether for children or for adults, their history, their belief system, and their genealogies, and then what they plan to do.
Yeah, it's all tied together. They want to start in your childhood and control your thoughts, just like you do in seminary. They want to plant those seeds, water those seeds, and then they grow and they just become normality for us.
Yep. So now when we enter into this, we're going to talk a little bit about Caleb and Jethro.
Yeah,
so
fascinating.
Yeah, and Jethro we're told, and Jethro has many names. Some people believe he had up to 7 names.
Really?
Yeah. And so it's important to remember that important priests would have multiple names and titles, and so would the kings and the queens, because it's in the tradition of their gods who would have multiple names. So like Baal has multiple names. One of them is Raphael, from which seemingly is how Rephaim took their name eponymously through Rapha the patriarch, and then eponymously named after both Rapha and Raphael, which is another name for Baal. Just we've talked about Adar, and we've talked about Hadad as names for Baal, right? So understand that the bloodlines typically would follow in the same sort of tradition. Now for Jethro, he's going to provide a wife to Moses. So he's of particular interest as to who is being supplied as a wife. And typically we understand Jethro as a Midianite. And there's different groups. There's a group of Midianites in the south and also in the east. So as we get into the book of Judges, when you see them aligning with the Amalekites and some of the wars, or in the conquest where you have the 5 Midianite kings, which are kind of a vassal pentapoles of Sihon in the battle east of the Jordan River in the time of the conquest, when Israel and Moses is still there, defeat Og, Sihon, then they take on the Midianites for their crimes against Israel. That's going to include Balaam and Job and and Jethro were all thought to be high priests within the Egyptian court at one point in time. As at least according to the Jewish history and legends would discuss. So now you have Jethro, who is a Midianite, who's living amongst Canaanites and Kenizzites and learning a smithcraft, right? And as we talked about, Kenites don't have a patriarch that fits the timetable. And the Kenites show up in Genesis 15 first, just as the Kenizzites do. So if we're going to take his patriarch back to Genesis 36, that's well after that, just by the verse number and a few hundred years, when Kenaz is going to be born. Or if you want to try and take him back to an Israelite bloodline. So again, it doesn't work with the history. So who are these people that the Midianites are living amongst? Are they survivors of people from before the flood? Or are they giants that survived the flood? And Kenite and Kenizzites, as I said, were very strong metallurgists, people who forged things, made weapons, made crowns, things like that. And Kenite actually goes back to the word Cain. So a lot of people will take that those are descendants of Cain who survived the flood. The Kenizzites are closely associated and thought to be just a different branch of the Kenites. Now, you can have a tribe of Kenites that are in the southern part of the covenant land, in the land of Horim and Seir, that are going to come from Kenaz that could start a tribe as well, right? And maybe more closely associated with who the people that Jethro is associating with. But what we can't do is get ahead of when the patriarch shows up from when the people show up. And so the MO tends to be giants, either recreated shortly after the flood or ones that survived the flood. And so, but Jethro clearly becomes a follower of the God Most High and introduces the God Most High to Moses. So he seems to have what I would call a resume God chose for him to be the mentor for Moses, who is going to be adopted into the royal family of Egypt, be educated in polytheism, learn who he is, and then lead the Exodus at some point in time. But before that, after he's exiled, he's going to be taken in by Jethro. And again, I don't look at any of that as coincidental. So Jethro would know how to speak to him.
Right. Well, Jethro
because
was. Go ahead.
That?
Jethro. Yeah, he was also an advisor to Pharaoh, I believe.
As a high priest.
Okay.
So he would speak the language of the royals. He would understand the religion. He could communicate in the language with Moses. Moses wasn't slow of speech because he was stupid. He spoke Egyptian, not Hebrew.
And he had a dispute with Pharaoh. That's why he moved. Is that right?
Yes. He had a dispute over the Israelites, as I understood the history of that. In terms of how they were being treated. So he may have had a conversion at that time, but he is the ideal person to educate Moses and help him as a mentor in what he's going to be preparing for, and has a complete understanding of polytheism and the Egyptian court. So
that was his vengeance, in a sense, against Pharaoh. He knew the tricks.
Whereas Balaam, he's going to actually try and curse Israel, right? As one of those three famous priests of Pharaoh. If that history is true, I have no reason to think otherwise. But biblically, we're not told that extra information, so I do like to be careful there. But Jethro is a Midianite, and when they are creating the statue of the bull, the Israelites are, when Moses is up on the mountain,
Yeah.
where does that smithcraft come from? From the Midianites or from the Kenizzites that may be working with some of the Israelites, or maybe even Jethro supplied the information. But to me, that doesn't make sense. Is if you're going to be the mentor of Moses, just because Moses has gone up to the mountain of the God you taught him about and to seek out, that you would rebel and supply that knowledge and worship the gods of Egypt. I think that's just was going on around maybe Jethro, but not Jethro inspired, but probably from the people, the Midianites and the Kenizzites and the Kenites, who are skilled in that sort of smithcraft.
But that would make more sense, Gary, because Jethro was the one that took the staff that he gave to Moses, and in order for them to make that bull out of gold, to melt that gold down, you're not going to do that with regular fire. It's going to take some kind of supernatural heat, which would come from that staff to do that.
Yep, there's that too. So, so it's interesting, but peer pressure is huge, right? And the people of the end time are going to understand that in spades, just as the early church did. Is it's one thing to be a follower; it's another to give testimony upon the threat of torture and death.
Yes. Yes.
So when I look at that, we don't get taught a context or a relationship with why Jethro shows up. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Moses finds Jethro and is found by one of his daughters. I don't think any of that is a coincidence, because the Bible doesn't work that way in coincidence. That's part of sort of the path that Moses is on, and he's brought there for a reason, so that he can go back and free and be the deliverer for Israel, for the Exodus. So, and then when we look at a fellow that shows up out of nowhere to be the right-hand man of Joshua as a scout and as a fighter in the wars after Moses dies, named Caleb, he's a Kenizzite. So that is very, very odd. So is he from a different line, from the descendants of Edom, or is he from the Kenites and Kenizzite group that survived the flood, or from giants? We're not told that. And the distinction, and yet he's this mercenary. So what's interesting about the name Caleb is it means dog.
Means what?
Dog, D-O-G.
Dog, right. Wow.
A dog mercenary. Well, where have we heard that before? Not biblically, but we hear of dog Nephilim, dog men. Right? And that have come right down through history, and even up into the time of the early church. And St. Christopher in the Greek Orthodox has Christopher with a dog's head, and he was a Canaanite mercenary from North Africa. So you have a dog god in Egyptian mythology and history named Anubis, a jackal god, and he procreated, and he created so many dog giants that he created a city named Sinoopolis. So Cynocephalis is the Greek term for the dog mythos, and this city was Sinoopolis, meaning dog city. And so we don't get biblically that there are dog Nephilim. I want to say that categorically. It's interesting that when Goliath has David walking towards him and he's mocking him with being a young teenager and having a slingshot, he says, "What do you think I am, a dog?" Because in the sort of giant mythos, dogs are lower level than the other giants in terms of the level of the patriarchal fallen angel that would begat that race in terms of where they fit in the angelic order. So, but biblically, we get this god that the Avim worshipped, named Nebaz. And this is the Eastern Avim group. And Nebaz is depicted in Shekuth as being a dog-headed god, just as the Avim also worship Nergal, the lion-headed god there. And you get that in the second book of Kings. And Nebaz, as you take that back to the Hebrew, means a barking god, and a god depicted with a dog's head. So, and I'm just throwing this out, that you have this mercenary, because these dog warriors throughout history, and you have like Pliny, Herodotus, Cestius, and on and on and on, with all of these historians documenting mercenary dog warriors in North Africa, in places like India, China, Southeast Asia. And the story is consistent that they come from the gods and they were warriors. And now you have a Kenizzite where we don't have a patriarch that might fit for Caleb, who his name means dog and he's a mercenary. And again, I'm not trying to get people to look at the Bible and say, well, you've created contradictions. Or what I'm trying to do in book 1 is get people to understand how the Bible intersects with the polytheist testimony. Book 2 does it the other way. And that names and events and people are very, very important with the details that we get about them, because it helps us understand that world. And so what we do know is the understanding of a mercenary wasn't as high as a loyal army member, but mercenaries were quite common. And even with the time of David, he is going to hire Philistines as mercenaries. Some of the Pelathim and the Cherithim are going to be bodyguards and special forces people for him. So this is not an unusual thing in that time period of hiring these mercenaries. And giants were common mercenaries hired for armies as well. So we have this sort of understanding of who Caleb is. And all I'm trying to do here is, through Caleb and through Jethro, is to talk about these tribes that are mentioned that are not accounted for within the Bible, from a table of nations perspective that come from Noah.
Really interesting.
But because the book is so big, I don't go further into it. And I also thought it was a bit too controversial. People maybe weren't quite ready for some of this. So
no, I wish you did.
That's why I put it all in book 2, the additional details on that. So.
Okay. That's why he gave a good report back, because he knew differently, possibly, if we look from the angle that you're saying.
Absolutely. And he would have been describing for Joshua who these people are. How they're interconnected, the differences in the groups. And he's an important factor that's helping the Israelites, so much so he's going to inherit and become the leader of Judah. And he's going to inherit Hebron, if you can believe it, home of Sheshai, Achiyman, and Talmai. And Hebron, before it was named Hebron, was called Kiriath Arba, the city of Arba, the father patriarch of the Anakim giants.
Well, I can be a second witness to you on that, Gary, during deliverance with those dog men you said, when you deal with people that have pledged to the Q dogs, which they're the entity that's over them is obviously a dog being, and when they manifest, they will bark like a dog. So I can attest to that.
And we do get jackal-like beings referenced as angels in Isaiah 13 and 34. The howling ones would be the jackals.
Okay.
So we have loose connections there, but if I ever deal with dogmen and as giants and do any biblical connection, it might be in a book 4, kind of a fun book on its own, where I deal with some really far out things, but not enough connections there, at this point to be. It's different than the lion men of Moab. We have to deal with that,
Right.
and the lion-like men of Gadite and Arioch. We have to deal with that. As mighty ones, as giants, as warriors, but those would be mercenaries as well. So it would be in the same sort of tradition.
Those are all in scripture too. When you read it in different contexts, ESV in the Amplified, when you read David's account, when David fought, we are taught in the church that he fought a lion and a bear. But if you read it, it said, I grabbed him by his beard, which was one of the lion-like men. And then it tells you in the book of Yasher, did not David kill Raphaim, not Goliath, but he was talking about that lion like. So it's all in there when you know what to look for.
If you know what to look for, yes. But until you're taught or you discover connections and start building on that, and again, you want to be careful that you're not sort of trying to take scripture in a direction it's not meant to go. So you want to be careful, but the context is everything with the detail. And it's there for us to better understand that kind of world. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we've got Goliath and his 4 brothers as giants and the Egyptian giant and a couple other things in the time of David. But if you don't give some sort of context for how lion-like men show up and who they are as mercenaries in the time of David before that, then it would seem just too out of place. But because we get some of that format, and that we get the idea of Aryans being connected to lions, Ariel, and Lion of God, you are able to make that sort of understanding that what goes on in the ancient world, even up into the time of David, is unlike anything we can imagine. Because it's still a world that is dominated, except for one country, one small place, with polytheism and with different beings who are clearly identified as different beings. And we will be like that as the church in the end time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's wonderful.
And there's a story, who was it? Benai, I think it was, that killed two lion-like men, of Moab. And it tells you that. But it doesn't say that plainly in some of the scriptures. It'll say like he killed 2 mighty men. But when you read it, just lion-like men, that's what he killed.
Well, yeah, and you have to be careful because you'll have mighty ones in there, like wilderness, for example, actually goes back to Gibor. And so the translators, if they've not been taught context, it's easy to say, well, I can't mean that, so I'll just do it this way, right?
Exactly.
There's an interesting account, and I know we're running short on time, so I'll be quick on this, that other peoples show up in the Bible, like the Amalekites, Makathim, as I call them in book 2. And they live in the Mount Hermon region. And around them are the Geshurites, or the Geshurim. And in the time of David, you have King Talmai of Geshur, of Mount Hermon, still alive. And when he makes a treaty with David, he's going to supply a female named Makkah to David as one of his wives. Makkah is a matriarchal name from the Makkathim as it comes down. Talmai is a patriarchal name that comes down from the Anakim for the king. So you have an intermarriage of giant royals being described there. And Makkah and David are going to produce Absalom.
Excellent. Mm-hmm.
That's a hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Absalom, after he flees for what happens with his sister, and I don't blame him for what he's doing for revenge of his sister, but he's going to go to the protection of Talmai in Geshur, right? And then he's going to come back and he's going to start a rebellion. And where does he start his rebellion from? He goes to Hebron, where Talmai was from, the original one.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least the first one that we're told about in the Bible, which was reported in Numbers 13 in the report of the giants. And you have those giants living there even into the early part of the time of the judges, because they keep coming back after they get driven out. It takes the third time to get rid of them. And so Absalom is now a hybrid who is starting a civil war, who could have got control, if he had won that war, of the Jewish monarchy, and again inheriting everything that goes with that. Context is everything. Details are everything in the Bible, if you understand who the peoples are and what the politics are. And we have to understand the war gene of the giants and power and the rivalries between them to understand what goes on in this world.
Very good point. Wow. Gary, that was fascinating. And like you said, context, understanding people, understanding the names, that's reinforced throughout the presentation today. And I think we've got to go back and now reread the chapter. They're just heightening now each program that we do with you, especially when it's coming into these particular contexts. So I've really enjoyed this, especially these ones. These are stories that we know.
And that's what the book does, is the information that's provided in the beginning will keep coming up.
Yes.
And as it comes up and new information is added, it will keep coming up.
Yeah.
And that's the style I wanted. It takes some patience sometimes, even though some, I think, very interesting stuff in every chapter. But all of this is moving forward in terms of how our world works and how we are in the society we are today and what's coming next. And if we don't understand that context, we'll be part of those who are going to be deceived in the end time.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why we've come together for this very purpose, what you've said. So we do have an understanding. The strap in EWHAL is for the prepared and the unprepared in these end times. So it's exactly aligning with what you're saying, Gary. Well, I want to thank you because it's just been so exhilarating, filling in the crevices for some of what they've only had in church at the very blurb, and it's never gone deeper. So I commend you for that today. It's been very thoroughly enjoyable for that. And on the program description, I actually put the website for Gary and also how you can get these books. You do need them. I've had them on Kindle, but Dallas, my son, he said we got to get them in hardback today. It's too much to try and do electronically. So we're going to progress to that. You do need them hardback. Like I've got these books. I enjoy having them in my hand and marking them. In fact, one of our friends, they took your book on holiday, but it's not the right book to take on a holiday. To study. So they didn't get too far on it. They tried.
His hair might come back gray and standing straight up after the vacation.
He really persisted trying to do it. His wife was laughing at him.
What I try and do is I try and bring the Old Testament to life. And, but not in a distorted way, but in a way that you can support, and it starts to make sense of things that you're reading.
Oh, you do it so well. That is excellent. Is there anything you wanted to surmise, Stacey?
No, it was all good stuff. I just I think it was Sherry in the chat. She was talking about the rod. They were talking about the rod again with Jethro, and I just wanted to let them know Jethro actually got the staff, not the rod. The rod is Aaron's. Aaron had a rod, and Moses had a staff. That's what David said, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So I just wanted to clarify that for them so they'll know.
Right. Thank you.
The details.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. So, Gary, week after next, you're back, and then towards the end of October, definitely. We're not sure because we're in Florida and it's a feast day, so probably it will be the end of October.
Yep,
and then
that's
we're
fine.
schedule.
In case there's some people in your organization that still wants to do something that day, I'll leave it open. But I understand how the calendar is working for you guys. So
yeah. Thank you. Now that's wonderful. We want to keep up this consistency. So I'm glad that you're back in the flesh, not just hearing your voice audibly, and that we're going back to the 2 weekly as much as possible.
Yep.
So really looking forward to get to your book 3. I know you need to settle on a schedule for next year so that you can do that. But it's very much needed. And thank you, because we started this in January. So pleasure working with you and continuing doing this.
Absolutely.
It's been fun, and just thoroughly enjoy presenting things to people that will hopefully create their own curiosity and go read about it and then do research on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you. And they definitely appreciate that here. So Stacey, thank you, my compadre, for always being here and helping, assisting. Wonderful working with you. And to the beautiful people in the chat, and obviously those who will join later, but Sherry, Catherine, Frank, Tony Lashley, Rick Johnson, Victoria, they're just some of the names that I'm seeing here. Rob, thank you. We know a lot of these by face, and some of these are your friends as well. We want to just thank you for this time and in the extended time. So let's just pray, Stacey, and then we'll dismiss everybody.
Okay. Yeah. Heavenly Father, we come to you once again, giving you thanks, praise, honor, and glory. We thank you for Brother Gary. We thank you for the word that went forth here today. And we pray that you would give everyone according to their needs. We pray that our words would fall off and that your word would stand. In the mighty name of Yahushua Mashiach, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Gary, once again, thank you so much. Very, very edifying, very enjoyable today. Okay, you take care, and we will see you next Tuesday. Yes. Bye-bye.
Sounds good.